Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Clive Mancy, for those who don't know me. I'd like to welcome all members and guests here today. I can see a couple of people here, that Ian and Meg, Louise's parents, welcome.
Thank you.
And Linda Barnes, hiding up there, new member, welcome. There are probably a few others, but... Marianne. It's important. The Storytellers. It's a small, intimate crowd, as you can see, and we want to make the most of it, so enjoy it, for sure. Before I hand over to Kieran, I'd like to run through a few formalities. I'd like to thank everyone who's presented this year, and all the helpers I've had, and there's a number of them, but it takes a few people to really make this what it is. This is our last story for the year, our 10th year, and we'll resume in February. And we'll have Dominic Dwyer's mother talking about Jacqueline, talking about a recent book release she's done, about Flanders in Australia, a personal history of wall and war, and it contains a lot of members' names and history around Mossman. It goes without saying, really, it's lovely to see such a good crowd. I was looking at the archives, my own archives for this, and for the last 6 years we've had some wonderful attendances for the November meeting. It's probably it's the end of the year and everyone's getting ready for Christmas, but I'd just like to run through who we have had for the last 6 years. Back in 2011 we had Forbes and Ursula Carlyle, if you remember that. That was talking about Sydney, cradle of Australian swimming. It was a packed house. The following November we had John Coates about the Olympic family. Then we had the centenary book with Ian and Ian Heads and Gary Lester, and we also had Jim Arnold, Jenny Holt, Kathy Mackay, and Karen Panaretto talking about their Manhattan swim. 2014 we had Swampy and Jack Stenning talking about the 3 sieges of Malta. The following year, 2015, Denise's daughter Lauren Elder talking about surf life saving in Vietnam, and Swampy talking about pictorial history of Sicily. And then last year, we didn't think we could do any better, really. It was Lucas Webb talking about the film industry, and John Hendricks talking about gold medals and Lane 4. But we have gone one better, haven't we? All right. So, but this is very much, tonight's very much about what we want from storytellers. We want to learn more about our fellow members and the stories which they generally too modest to tell themselves under normal circumstances. Both Louise and Doug are great examples of characters within the BBC. To me, Louise is the person who greets me on the beach with that wonderful welcome. Hello, you pommy bastard. So, now at this point I'd like to introduce Kieran Kelly. Kieran's a club character in his own right, an author, explorer, keeps us posted on the welfare of our friends when hospitalised, has always been a great supporter of the Storytellers, and has worked hard in preparing for this evening's presentation and film premiere. I told Kieran I'd like to film this evening for our wonderful archives, and as you can see, he's gone to a lot of trouble to ensure that the filming will be done to the highest standard, as befits someone who has just completed his first year in a course of cinematography at the Australian Film, Television and Radio School. Thanks, Claude. And for the second part of the evening, we are showing a film that Kieran shot immediately prior to the beginning of this course. Also in the audience is Anna, welcome Anna, who edited the film, this film we'll see, and the recording sound is Mukul. Where is Mukul? Mukul's there. Once again, thanks to everyone for coming along, and now at this point, I move back to the limelight over here.
Thanks very much, Clive, and thanks very much for everyone coming along. Can you hear me okay? What we'll be doing this evening is we'll be interviewing Doug and Louise in 2 parts. So I'll do Doug first and then Louise, and if you wouldn't mind, we'll then have a section for questions. It'll flow a lot better and we won't run out of time if you just hang on to your questions, and there'll be 15 to 20 minutes at the end of the interviews to ask questions. Now, we might turn to Louise, and I'll just get a bit of a background from Louise, and then we want to show you a short film clip, if we could. So Louise, how did you get into sailing?
I started small boat sailing because my brother was sailing because he didn't really want to play any other sports, and so I started at Balmoral down here at the other end and sailed on dinghies. So
How old were you at this stage?
8.
Right.
Thank you.
And how did you progress?
Sorry, 8. Okay. Okay, I can be loud. Okay.
And how did you progress through your teenage years in sailing?
I did small boat dinghy sailing for a while until I was probably early teens, and then other teenage girl interests took over and I stopped sailing.
Right. And then when did you start again?
I didn't really start again until I had the occasional fun sailing day, but I didn't really start again until I was graduated from university.
Right.
So in late 20s.
Sorry about that.
Although I did have a few periods of time when I sailed with some friends who were competing in high-level races, and they needed the occasional small person to run around the bow. So I was very fortunate to have friends who were very good sailors. So I had friends who represented the country in the Olympics multiple times, and occasionally in their training I would jump in and just help them out. I was never part of a crew, but I was always useful because I could run around and do stuff and keep them training on the harbour.
And how old were you when you did your first Sydney to Hobart?
Oh, 21 like now? I don't remember.
Approximate?
Maybe late 30s.
Late 30s. And how many have you done now?
I've done 11.
You've done 11?
Yeah.
So, Louise, we just want to take you to a video, a short video film clip, about 3 minutes, and I'll get you, when you've watched it, to comment on your experience. I've heard your experience on this particular race, and I'd like you to share it with everybody else if you wouldn't mind.
One of the most tragic stories came from the crew of the 56-year-old cutter Winston Churchill, the oldest boat in the fleet. Of the 9 crew who started the race, only 6 would survive.
This particular sea came out of nowhere, and Richard observed it, tried to get the bow up and over the top of it, but the wave actually broke as he was trying to manoeuvre the boat over the top of the seaway, and the boat was just lifted up, thrown sideways at a 45-degree angle into the trough in front, and that was where all the damage happened, in that one hit. So with that, it was a case of get the life rafts out and put them up on deck and just get ready to. Looks like we're going to have to bail out. There's the boat's taking water all the time.
The Winston Churchill sank just 5 minutes after the Mayday in treacherous seas on Sunday night. The 9 on board scrambled into 2 life rafts. They were tied together, but later torn apart by the enormous waves.
4 got into one raft and 5 got into another raft. We did have a line tied between them, but that didn't last very long at all, so that broke, which was a blessing in disguise, because it possibly would have pulled each other apart if they had have stayed tied together. And then we took off, and that was about, I believe, probably around about 4:30 in the afternoon, or closer to 5 probably. So we still had sunlight, and we were just then at the mercy of the wave and winds. It was a pretty interesting experience, that's for sure.
For the crew of Winston Churchill, it was to be the beginning of a 28-hour nightmare.
We've just got quite bad news down below is that John Gibson, who is our crewman down there in the red cap, his father and crewmates were on board a boat called the Winston Churchill, which went down, and they evacuated the boat into a life raft. They're still not found yet, so that may bear some gravity to the conditions we're experiencing. One of the oldest and strongest boats in the fleet with one of the most experienced crew, and they're still not found, so we're hoping.
At the height of the storm, 16 yachts were sending out distress signals and 150 lives were at risk. Meanwhile, other...
Thanks, Jackie. As mentioned there, John Gibson, a senior member of the Beach Club, was on board Winston Churchill in the same race that Louise was on. And I just want to read you a few comments that he made after he arrived back. John obviously survived, and he was asked what the memories were like. And he said, "The sea is the sea, and when the sea's angry and man's there, anything can happen. You had to be there, and a lot of very brave people went out there, and I owe my life to the guys in the Navy and the ABC helicopters, everybody on rescue. And tomorrow's another day, and we've learned a lot." He was then asked, are there any rules that the coroner could bring or recommendations that would ever stop the same thing happening again? And he said, when you're out in the sea, you're on your own, mate, and what happens is very much up to you and God and the sea. And it's just wonderful to be here. We invited John to join us tonight, but unfortunately he's too ill. So Louise, if we could turn to you, can you just tell us about that memorable event, that night that I would have thought most people would never go back to sea again after this happened to them. Would you just like to share it with people, please?
Well, I'll try to put it into some reasonable time frame because it's quite a long time and you can almost relive hour by hour. But the real nastiness started, it was daylight, to be honest, when we had it. We started, as you all know, you start at 1 o'clock in the harbour, and it was a very strong wind, huge, beautiful day, classic nor'easter, and I was on a 41-foot yacht, and there was a very strong southerly current. So this was a quite fast type of boat, designed to go quick, get up on the wave and go fast. So we were going between 15 and 16 knots sailing the boat, but on the water speed was 18 to 21 knots. So we were at the end of mainland Australia by sunrise of the next day, which is incredibly quick. That was actually nearly majority of the fleet were ahead of the race record. We're talking about 40, 50, 60-foot boats were all hooning down on a moving platform, which then hit another moving platform coming the other way. So what happened was this incredible seaway occurred, and the wind changed direction. So we're going along, and the wind then came around to the front of the boat, and so we went from spinnaker sailing to dropping that, to reefing the main, to small headsails, and still going downwind, to then the wind coming around, then we're double reefed main, the smallest headsail you can have, and then the wind was coming into us, and so we're going at probably effectively 6 or 7 knots, and the sea just started to get bigger because the wind produces the sea. So the wind strength just started to come up, and it was 30 knots, 40 knots. We're thinking, oh well, it's a Hobart, this is what happens. At some point in time you put your storm gear up, so we ended up putting the storm gear up. So you drop your mainsail and you put up what's called a trysail, which is like a tiny little handkerchief. It barely goes a quarter of the way up the mast and halfway along the boom. And a trysail, which is a very tiny headsail, and you saw a lot of boats in that just had a trysail up. So, and that's enough to keep the boat moving. And then the wind strength was coming up and the wave height was going up. So we got to a point where the wind strength had got to 80 knots and the wave height was well above this building, and we're going into it. So it's relatively easy because you go up a wave and then you go down it. So it's a bit like if you're in the surf and it's really big, you can just keep swimming out, and then you turn to go and you're going, I'm going to turn around, and no. So it was very it was easy to keep going into it. And then we had a discussion on the boat, and we're by then the middle of Bass Strait, and there was a
What, on the second day?
This was midday. We hadn't even been sailing for 24 hours. This is 23 hours into the boat, and we're in Bass Strait, so it's very quick. So it's daylight, it's effectively sunny, but you couldn't really see because there's so much sea spray. And most interesting seeing that, forget that the seaway was so big that waves were forming in the middle of the ocean. So you actually had breaking 100-foot waves out there. So it was kind of, and none of us had experienced that before. So we're all going, oh well, this is kind of Hobart and, you know, toughen up. This is what you get. So, and we had a couple of very experienced guys on the boat, and they decided we should turn around, which is all very well, but turning around and running that side of the sea is incredibly difficult. And so we made a decision and sort of came into the top of the boat wave, and a couple of times we actually got to the top of a wave and went to turn around and bail because it was like too daunting, because you're just looking down in this massive hole of water. So ultimately we did do that, and then we realised immediately that having a trysail up and a storm jib up was too much pressure, because you'd get on the top of a wave and you'd start to go down it and you go too fast. And so for about half an hour we're just going down this and straight into the back of the next wave. So you'd literally go completely underwater. The whole boat would be underwater. So
Louise, you turned around at this stage?
we turned around. We're then going north, heading north. So somewhere in the middle of Bass Strait, heading north. By that time we had a couple of people really seasick, and older people who were basically not going to come up on the deck. And so
you're on deck?
I'm on deck,
Are you on
I'm
the
steering,
helm?
I'm on the helm. The guy who owned the boat had decided that, so we dropped the mainsail and we dropped the replacement mainsail, which is called a trysail, and lashed that all to the boom. And we had maybe half a dozen people on deck, big mistake at the time. And the guy who owned the boat had decided we were going too fast, but we thought we still needed the little tiny headsail up to get steerage. So he came to the back of the boat, and we were trying to put out a drogue. A drogue is like a parachute, it's like a plastic umbrella, and it's connected to a long tether, like a long rope. So we'd tie that onto the boat, and he was in the process of throwing that out to the ocean to try and slow the boat down, because we're going at 8 knots, which is way too fast. We're going too fast to the wave. And in the process of him doing that, he slipped and he knocked me off the wheel. So the boat immediately went straight upside down in a blink of a second. It was amazing. So instantly we're upside down. And then luckily, because of modern boats, the keel is very heavy, and because we didn't have any real sails up, the boat righted itself. So the boat came up, and then of course nobody's on it. So the boat
Where
came
are
up,
you at this stage?
I'm under the boat being dragged along. Everybody is off the boat. We're all connected by tethers being dragged along. So I'm upside down under the boat, and I remember seeing the name of the boat upside down, thinking, suddenly it's really quiet. That was nice, because it was so noisy. Like the wind was like in your head, and all of a sudden it was quiet, and I'm watching winch handles falling down and going, oh, not a fish, can't breathe down here. And the next thing, I was flung up, and I'm like I'm nose planting into the wheel, because I'd gone through the wheel, so the riding moment of the boat had flicked me back into it. So I'm then the only person on the boat, facing backwards, seeing the next wave coming, going. And all I can see is orange tethers. There's nobody there. Seriously, there's nobody there, because the people below were there. They were protected, because you put washboards in the boat, which are more or less confines it. So I'm sort of facing backwards, trying to steer the boat, and luckily managed to steer it through a couple of wave sets, and like watching these waves coming and going, this isn't the plan, you know, it's a bad joke, it's not quite how I thought I'd die.
So
anyway.
is there anyone on the deck other than
No,
you?
just
at this
me
stage?
facing backwards. So, and so then one of the guys who was below came up, and the only other able-bodied person on the boat, and he broke through the washboards, came up. He was able to unclick me so I could go the other side of the wheel and at least face forwards and reconnect me. And and then we realised at that point that the owner, the guy who'd come and thrown the drogue, he was a hell of a long way away. He was 200 metres away, not connected to the boat anymore.
Oh.
So we're going out. We're going north with the wave. So he had actually called a pan call, which is what you do before a mayday. The idea is mayday is like outright, we're sinking, we're doomed. Pan is we think we have a problem, we may need some help. So he'd done a pan from below when he was still in the thing, and luckily there's buttons you push to sort of lock into the computer where you are. So anyway, trying to shorten the story, this is all a lot happening, but you don't really know what you're doing. We realised that this guy, the owner, was still the same distance away, and we're still moving at 6 knots, so going, that's weird. So he was actually caught up in his drogue. He was actually caught in it. So we're thinking, okay, so we'd see him, a big wave would come behind you to lose sight of him. It was like a big fish, and the rope would go ding, meaning, okay, so we had to get somebody else up. And the sides of boats, modern boats, are fiberglass, and they're incredibly shiny and sleek. And trying to drag a guy who's 70, 80 kilos, who's wet, he probably weighs effectively 100 kilos, and trying to get them back on, so we got one guy, as soon as he could get like a finger hole, we got him on. So we had 2 people, and then they got one more guy on, and then they just spent the whole time bringing this guy in, and I'm just basically staring, facing me going, ugh. So it took us an hour and a quarter to get Scott back in. We decided he was a priority. So you have to make these decisions, because we didn't know how long what he was connected to would work.
But why, for us unnautical people, he's being dragged through a very big sea. Presumably he's got a life vest on, but he's being dragged along at speed. Why didn't he drown?
He didn't have a life vest on. He had a harness, and his harness he hadn't done up properly. So it was a bit like there's it's a Rambo type thing, and they climb, and he didn't do the buckle up properly. So when the load took, it just went zzz, and he didn't have a crutch strap on. So it actually went straight over him. So you can be done up like this, but if you get pulled like that, it just comes off you.
So he's a very lucky man.
He's very lucky. So we got him in. He'd tried to hold on to the rope for a while. His fingers, he still has a massive scar. He was cut through to the bone on both hands, trying to hold the rope. So we finally got him in, finally got in everybody. One of the guys the last guy we got in from the side of a boat, we got him in, and it was a young guy, and we put him in the cockpit of a boat. And I thought there's something terribly wrong with this guy, and I'd never seen it before, and I hope I never see it again, but he was in catalepsy, which is a state of shock, which I think people do get. And water was hitting his face, and he wasn't blinking. You could walk up to him, and he was completely non-responsive. His eyes were open, and he was breathing, but he had absolutely no recall. And so we got him below and put a life jacket on him and tied him to the mast, the base of the mast inside the boat. And he actually took 2 days before he became conscious in any sense that you would know. You could walk up to him, you could do this. He was it was like a zombie. The shock, it was just the most amazing shock experience. So
Did all this happen during the afternoon of the second day or into the evening?
In the afternoon.
Into the evening. So you got everyone back on board before dark?
Oh yeah, early afternoon. It was summer, so it's not like...
What do you do then?
So then everyone went below, and nobody else wanted to steer. So I'm thinking, okay. So I continued steering and I put in my requests, my written requests of water and food. So I must admit I did go for about 3 years after that where I really couldn't stomach Christmas cake. But anyway, I was brought cake and water and just steered the boat. And then
How long were you on the helm for?
well, I was on the helm for about 12 hours, and then one of the guys said, got to give you a break. Well, the sea was still really big, and he came up, and so I think, great, so I get in there, and I'd re-tethered, about to take up washboards, and then we're upside down again. So, but luckily this time somebody was there, and they just jumped out straight away, and I'd gone through the side rail, so I was just hanging on, and they brought me back in, so back on steering duty.
So just walk us through, if we can revisit. You're under the boat. You know the boat's on top of you and it's upside down. Does it ever cross your mind what happens if the keel breaks off?
No.
Why? Tell everyone what happens if the keel breaks off.
Oh, the boat won't right itself.
So you'll stay under the boat.
Oh, you just drown.
So did that
Because
cross...
you're upside down, you're still moving at 6 knots.
That's right, but did that cross your mind that I hope the bloody keel doesn't break off?
No, not in the time I had. No,
Right.
I just thought it was a really bad joke,
Okay.
and it can stop now.
So,
Seriously, I think you're just going, okay, it's not so funny anymore. I reckon even on your last breath of some terminal disease, you're going to go, this is a bad joke, or we should stop. It's like kind of not fun anymore.
so Louise, one of the interesting things is how long... I would have thought that would have cured most people of the sea, of sailing, of Sydney to Hobart's, everything. How long was it before you went on your next Sydney to Hobart?
2 years later.
2 years later. Was that did you approach that with fear and trepidation? Were you nervous? I would have thought it would require a lot of guts to get on a yacht and go to Hobart again.
I think the journey, it's not about the Hobart. I think a lot of people, it produced a huge amount of weather conditions which are extraordinary and a bit like the Fastnet series before. But I've had, similarly quite scary situations sailing up the north coast, going up to Mooloolaba and Southport and going to Lord Howe. I think it was just, it was more, I learned a lot about sailing, and I won't sail unless I know the people and I trust them. It's a lot about trust, because right. You can't have a crew of people who don't know what's going on and don't know how to work the boat. So I won't sail on something for that distance if I don't know the people. And the new rules have made it almost impossible for that to happen. You can't just have some rock star turn up and say, I'm going to sail on your boat. They have to be fairly well accredited.
And how many Sydney to Hobarts have you done since that one?
Well, that was number 1.
Oh, was it? That was your first one?
Number 1. They've got better since.
Well, on that note, thank you, Louise. You might put your hands together for a survival. We've just got a short amount of time for a few questions. Would anyone like to ask a question? Yeah.
Is this the first time your mum and dad have heard about this?
No.
I could just say on that night that she eventually came in, I got the phone message. We were entertaining, we had a lot of people for dinner, and she said, I'll be in the Heads in about half an hour, and we were going to Manly. So I said to the guests, there's pudding, help yourselves, please shut the front door, I'm going.
Good for you.
And Lou, how long did it take to get to Twofold Bay? Did you go back to Twofold Bay?
We ended up going into Eden, and Eden was very sad because there were boats with drowned crew members and boats with missing crew members. So Eden was it was in some ways sad, and in some ways everyone was grouping together. They had an incredible backup with mostly women of the community, and they all took on a boat each, and they came and greeted each crew and took them back to their houses, and you had showers and food, and that was incredible. But we went to Eden, and then more than half the people were picked up by family members who drove down, and some of us took the boat back up.
Tony?
Were there other boats, planes,
planes, helicopters? What was the activity of people outside of the race trying to help you?
You didn't see anyone. I didn't see anyone else. I saw a helicopter or two. Yeah, but
They couldn't help.
well, we never really called for help, and we knew there were people in big trouble around, and we did manage to get our crew member back on board. So, in theory, we didn't need external help. We heard the calls on the radio for other crews, and we certainly heard all about. You could hear Winston Churchill calls on the same radio sked, so you knew there was big rubbish going on there. They were a long way away from us. They were like 150 miles away from us. So, yeah.
When the boat went over, did anything break on the boat?
Surprisingly not. No. Although what's interesting is that the next year in a race, the rudder just broke off. So I expect it got damaged during that, but no.
That same boat that you were on?
The same boat, yeah.
Have you considered what may have happened?
Hang on, John, just a moment, just down the back there.
How long did it take from when you turned around to get you back to Eden?
We got in early morning, so maybe 16 hours.
Yeah, John?
Sorry.
Have you considered what may have happened if you'd have made the decision to continue south?
Oh, many times. I think possibly we might have made it. It's easier to sail into the wind, and I think we would have sailed outside of as the storm cell was moving, so you can, it's a fairly simple equation. The way the storm cell is going, it's moving a certain direction, so if you aim over there, it'll pass you. Even though we're in the middle of it, you can work out, there are these rules of how you avoid storm cells, so you can work out the best way to get to the edge of it as quickly as possible. But at that point we had quite a lot of injured people, and the decision was to go in.
Louise, how many people on the boat was it their first Sydney to Hobart?
We had 11 crew members, and I'm pretty sure it was 10.
And how many never sailed again?
Maybe 3. One guy, as soon as he got home, he decided to break off a long-term relationship. Yeah, a bit of a mind-cleansing event for him. That was a bit much. But most of them did go back into sailing a bit. Yeah.
Tonic boy?
No, he hasn't sailed again. No.
I'm sorry to chop it off here.
No.
We've got to get through a bit. We're going to have a break now for 10 minutes, is it, Clyde? And then we're going to come back and show a very short film, and there'll be an opportunity to ask questions after that. So thank you very much.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday.